So hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, I just want to say I'm Nancy Kane. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whatever it may be, to the Tolerance Education Center's first event since March of 2020. To the extent that the commemoration of the Holocaust can be a source of education, a tool for understanding, and a resource for peace, it is a privilege to be able to tour Traces of Memory today, a photo exhibition that celebrates the vibrancy of Jewish life in Poland before the war. It would be difficult to ignore some of the echoes of the Jewish experience during the Holocaust with the current displacement of the Ukrainian people today and the continued importance of Holocaust education. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief to allow for conversation at the end, although with these technical glitches, I'm not sure how that'll pan out. We'll do our best. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat and we'll try to address them. And so I just want to say that I'm very lucky to have met Jakub Nowakowski so early in my career at Tech, who is the director of the Galicia Jewish Museum, and grateful that he has agreed to give us a little history and tour the museum and answer some questions about or share some information about how the museum has pivoted in response to the crisis on its borders. And with that, I give it over to Jakub. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. It's an absolute pleasure to be spending this evening in Krakow, and again, afternoon or morning with you. This is, as you know, a very special day, Yom HaShoah. So throughout this day and yesterday and tomorrow, here in Poland, here in Krakow, being so close to Auschwitz, being in the place where Holocaust happened, we are commemorating the victims. And again, this is a pleasure to be able to spending this day with you. Again, we had some difficulties, so it would be great if you could be letting Nancy know, maybe through the chat, if everything goes well, if you can hear us and see us, or if there's any glitches. But otherwise, if I will not be hearing Nancy waving red flags, I'll just keep talking. But again, please feel free to ask questions at any time. All right, so let us proceed, and I hope you can see everything. This is, ladies and gentlemen, a view at Kazimierz district in the city of Krakow. You see snow, but please don't be terrified. This is a presentation from the winter, so it's much better these days. But what I wanted to show you is where we are. This is this brick building you can see here. This is the old synagogue. So the oldest synagogue in Poland and one of the oldest synagogues in all of the Eastern Europe. It was built in 15th century and for centuries has been one of the centers of the religious, but also a political and cultural life of Krakow Jews. This entire district is unique because unlike other districts, Jewish neighborhoods in Warsaw or other places in Eastern Europe, which were destroyed during the Holocaust and after, Kazimierz has never been destroyed. You can see, you can touch, you can experience, in a sense, glimpses of this old world that existed here throughout centuries. And if you could take a look around, this is where we are. Those 4 buildings. This is actually the Galicia Jewish Museum, which was founded back in 2004 by two Brits, Professor Jonathan Weber, anthropologist and expert on the Holocaust, and photographer, journalist Chris Schwartz. And we're working on a clock, on a limited time, so I won't be able to tell you everything about Chris and Jonathan. But I wanted to mention that what they created, what they wanted to create, was not a Holocaust memorial, was not a museum that would be devoted only to death and destruction. They wanted to create something that precisely in the shadow of Auschwitz, which is just 40 miles west from Krakow, they wanted to create space which would be representing life, which would be devoted to Jewish culture, Jewish world that existed here in Poland and Eastern Europe throughout centuries. And yes, we have one of the largest Jewish bookshops in Poland, and you can see all of it on our website, galiciajewishmuseum.org. All right. So this is the entry to the core exhibition called Traces of Memory, contemporary look at the Jewish past in Poland. So this is the exhibition that Chris and Jonathan have been working on for almost 15 years, between 1993 and 2004, when the museum was open. Since 2004, the exhibition has been updated. And what is unique in this exhibition is that it doesn't represent one moment in time. It shows the processes that have been happening in Poland throughout the last 30 years. And it shows great variety of subjects related to the experience the Polish Jews had in Poland, although we are focusing on the southern Poland, the area that once was called Galicia, throughout centuries. The exhibition is divided into a few different chapters, into a few different sections. And the entire exhibition is photographic. Those photographs were taken by Chris Schwartz, and then after his death in 2007 by another US photographer, Professor Jason Francisco. The text and research was done by Professor Jonathan Weber. And the exhibition here starts with acknowledgement that while there is a revival of Jewish life, and I'll be talking about this in a second, in most cases, what you see in Poland is this landscape of absence. Places that used to be filled with Jewish voices, places that used to be Jewish, but are any longer because of the destruction and because of the post-war period. And so I'd like to start with this one photo. This is a photo of the main square in a small town east of Krakow. And this is used to be, again, a place that the city itself was around 20-ish% Jewish. But if you would look at the aerial photo of the main square, of this particular main square, and you would tag all the buildings with the names of their owners, you'd see very quickly that almost entire main square was actually occupied by the Jews of Piecz, of this town. So this was a town where the Jewish visibility was present everywhere, especially in this main square. And actually, on this main square, on this very main square, you can see the synagogue. This used to be this building here, the yellow building here, used to be a synagogue. You can still recognize two entries, one for men and one for women. And it tells you a few things. It tells you that, again, the Jews of this village were visible. They were proud of their Jewishness. They were taking an active part in the life of that town. And the fact that today there is not a single Jew living in Piecz, the destruction was total. The roots been burned so deep that 78 years later, the Jewish life is still gone. The synagogue, the former synagogue, is now being used as a library. It's been renovated, and actually there is a small, very recently opened a small exhibition devoted to the story of that town. But there are also, if you travel through Poland, you will see other traces, less visible, not only synagogues, but also those traces. And I'm sure most of you will very well know what this trace is. This is a trace after mezuzah. You'll find them across Poland, Polish towns and cities in many places. They are disappearing because those buildings are being renovated. And again, in most of those places, the new tenants, new inhabitants are not Jewish, so they would not fill this scar with a new mezuzah. But nevertheless, still, if you come to Krakow, you will see many, many places, many buildings with those signs. The destruction that obviously happened during the war. In Poland in 1939, Poland had around 35 million inhabitants. 10% of them were Jewish, 3.5 million people. Most of them, 90% of them, were killed in the Holocaust. And destruction happened during the war, the mass killing happened during the war, but the destruction of the traces of the Jewish heritage continue also after the war. And this is a very stark and terrible example. This is the photo that Chris Schwartz, the photographer, took in a small village where the farmer took him and showed him what his father-in-law did after the war. His father-in-law took a tombstone from the abandoned Jewish cemetery, broke it into pieces and paved the entrance to his house with those pieces. When Chris was there in 1990s, this new person, new family that lived there took it back to the cemetery. But nevertheless, this is an example of the destruction of those processes that have been happening after the war in the places where there were no Jews left. So this first section that is filled with examples of emptiness, of ruins, of destruction is acknowledging the fact that yes, most of those places that bears any trace of Jewish heritage are today occupied by the people that are not Jewish. That Poland is, yes, in many ways, land of ruins, land of ashes. It's a place where Jewish life used to be. But after acknowledging this very sad reality, we are wondering or asking our visitors to try to imagine what if, instead of coming to Poland and looking at the absence, at destruction, we would look at the glory, at the diversity of the Jewish world that existed in Poland throughout centuries. And we have, so let's take a look at this photo. This is a photo of the synagogue in a small town of Łańcut, one of the most beautiful synagogues still existing in Poland. It was restored right after the war. And today it tells you something about, again, the beautiful, diverse community, not the richest in Poland, just one of hundreds, one of thousands small Jewish shtetls that was created this beautiful, beautiful synagogue, and that can still tell us something about this life. But how about we look at this photo here? It talks about different aspects of this experience of the Polish Jews in Poland throughout centuries. This is also a synagogue. You can see this unusual shape with a tower. This is actually, the tower is a prison. Since Middle Ages, when the big wave of Jewish settlers arrived to Poland, the Polish kings gave the Jews great deal of freedoms, great deal of privileges, among them freedom of religion, freedom of language, independent legal system. And if you have independent legal system, so you have Jewish courts and Jewish judges, you also need the Jewish prisons. So this actually tower was used as a prison, and this the Jews had their own independent legal system that was called Vat Artsot, so government of four lands. And so this unusual set of freedoms, unusual in terms of Middle Ages Europe, was actually in life until the very end of the first Polish Republic, until the first Polish Kingdom, so until the partitions in 18th century. And you know, Poland of, if we would step into a time machine, and if we would move to Poland of, let's say, end of 18th century, is actually a very, very important place in terms of Jewish life. At the very end of 18th century, approximately 75% of all the Jews of the world are living in Poland. So this is where Jewishness is happening. But Poland is important not only because of the number of the Jews that lived at that time in Poland, again, 75% of all the Jews of the world, but also because of the quality of the things that have been created. And until today, many Jewish visitors are coming to Poland, not only to see places like Auschwitz, but actually to see this synagogue, which is called the Remu Synagogue, and actually a cemetery which is just next to, where Moshe Isserles, a very famous rabbi, is buried. And Moshe Isserles has codified the Jewish tradition that was created in Middle East, Palestine, to the realities of the Ashkenazi world. And if you are an Ashkenazi Jew, there's a big chance that you are actually following the rules and customs that were created in Krakow, in Kazimierz, by Moshe Isserles, called Rem. The Polish Jews were diverse. Some of them were a kind of fiddler on the roof type of fellows, living in small shtetls where majority of inhabitants would be Jewish, isolated, poor, and this is one of the examples. This is actually a photo taken in the small village of Bobova, which is again important because Bobova is the center of the Bobover Hasidim, the dynasty of Hasids called Bobover. And every year again they would come to this very little village, to this very little cemetery, not to mourn, not to cry, but to rejoice, because this is where their great tzaddikim were born. So on one hand, you have those very traditional Orthodox Hasidic Jewish communities, but at the same time, you, especially in 18th, 19th, and 20th century, you would see a growing number of those Jews that would consider themselves to be Polish Jews, to be Jews of Jewish origins or Mosaic faith. And this is actually a photo of a grave at the Jewish cemetery. Here in Krakow, it's called New Cemetery, but it's more than 200 years old. And here you see a grave of Maurice Gottlieb. What is important is that this grave, as you can see, is very different from those graves that you could see on the Hasidic cemeteries. It has more Catholic style. Inscription is in Polish. It is a representation again of those of this growing number of Jews of 19th and 20th century that would consider themselves to be Polish Jews. And one of my favorite photographs in this exhibition is actually here. This is the photo of a wall, which is the entrance to the Wawel Castle. Wawel Castle in Krakow is a castle of Polish royal kings. With the exception of one, all of the Polish kings are buried here in that very castle. And when in 1920s the conditions of the castle was poor, there was a crowdfunding operation to fund the renovation. And the donors are recognized until today. And take a look at this flag, which is recognizing one of the donors, Israel Mendelbaum, a mayor of a city of Trzebija, which is west of Krakow, and actually owner of the network of hotels. So it again tells us something that we can only wonder why Israel Mendelbaum has donated a significant amount of money to renovate the castle of the Polish kings. Perhaps he considered the story of those kings and the kingdom to be part of his Polish Jewish identity. But of course, Polish Jews been again diversified, and you can see here some of those examples. Some of them you can see on this photo to the right, been living in the city centers, in the wealthy neighborhoods, were successful economically, but most were very poor. They've been living in a shabby neighborhood, in small, overpopulated districts and houses, and would struggle to have the ends meeting. And of course, Polish Jewish experience was not empty or not without problems. Anti-Semitism, especially growing in 1920s, 1930s, persecutions. All of this was also a part of the daily life.
Jacob, can I interrupt?
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's possible that we only have a few minutes left, and I'm very disappointed because I'm finding this totally fascinating. I could listen to you all day. But in case we do get cut off at the 40-minute mark, can I ask you to say something about Polish-Jewish relations today and how the Galicia Jewish Museum has pivoted to respond to the crisis?
Yes.
Because
yes,
I think that
course.
is both interesting and important. Thank you.
All right, lovely. Of course. So let me just skip, like in one sense, to tell you what we are actually skipping. And again, this is a product placement. You can actually, if you go to galiciamuseum.org, you can actually buy a ticket and do this entire tour yourself. Or we can organize another tour, and I'll be happy to continue. But we have another two sections: the section about the Holocaust, and again, so I'm sorry we don't really have time to go through it, and then the section which is showing what was happening in Poland after 1945, the experience of the Polish Jews after the Holocaust. They were Polish Jews living in Poland after 1945. There is a continuity of the Jewish presence that is important, and also, and usually, often, totally forgotten. But answering question, well, you know, in 1990s when Poland regained independence after 50 years, after 1945, for 50 years Poland was part of communist bloc, and these were bad times, terrible times for the Polish Jews. But then in 1990s Poland became a democratic country, and then something unexpected happened. Something very, very unexpected happened. This is the revival of Jewish life. Suddenly we've seen that there are both the old Jews, those that are members of the old families, children of the Holocaust survivors, that they were started to be visible again. And this gentleman at the very center is actually a present-day chairman of the Jewish community, Director Jakub. He himself is a Holocaust survivor. His father and his father of his father were all running the Jewish community, the Kehila, the traditional Orthodox Jewish community. And here you see him standing in one of the other synagogues. We have 7 synagogues in Krakow during one of the holidays. So we have those Jews that have been always here, but we're not afraid. It wasn't possible for them to be Jewish throughout the communist time. But what happened after in the 1990s was also creation of the new Jewish community. And this is a Jewish community center located here in Krakow, which is again much more focused, much more future oriented, which is bringing lots of people that are from Krakow or from Poland, but also lots of people that don't have roots, that are coming from outside, but are Jewish and are looking for a place for them. And Galicia Jewish Museum been here for the last whatever it is, 18 years, since 2004, and for many years Galicia Jewish Museum would offer a place, a secular place where people could see glimpses or examples of living Jewish life. For us, it was also it is also very important to be kind of a bridge between the Jewish visitors in the Jewish community and non-Jewish Poles. In 2019, before pandemic closed us all in our houses, in 2019 we had more than 70,000 visitors, 40% of them Poles. On top of those 70,000 people, we've worked with more than 30,000 Polish students and Polish kids in their hometowns. This is across all of Poland. This is where most of the traces of the Jewish heritage is, and we do it because we want them to know something about the Jewish history. We want them to fight the anti-Semitism. We want to challenge the stereotypes, but also something that we want them to really do is actually to take responsibility for preserving traces of the Jewish heritage that are visible in their hometowns, their villages. We understand that this should be most of all their responsibility as the present-day inhabitants of those towns. Well, maybe there are questions that we can squeeze in with before the end of the time. And otherwise, I can keep talking for many, many hours.
Tell us about how you've transformed part of the museum at this time.
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, in 2019, maybe I can just close it now. Maybe in I mean, we all know about the war in Ukraine, and over the 6 weeks or 7 weeks since it started, there were more than 230,000 people, Ukrainian refugees, coming into Krakow itself, almost 3 million to Poland. And just to give you an idea, Krakow is a city of around 900,000 inhabitants. And now we have, on top of those 900,000, 230,000 refugees from Ukraine. Mostly, these are women with children. The men were not allowed, the men between 16 and 65 are not allowed to leave Ukraine. They need to fight. So most of those refugees are actually people, are women, older or younger, and the children. And for us, we quickly realized that we need to be taking part in providing help. And we've done it through sending supplies, by collecting food, and so on and so on. But also we realized that among approximately 40% of those 230,000 in Krakow are children. Are children under the age of 15 or 16. So we've decided to create a space, to turn part of the space of the Galicia Jewish Museum and create a daycare center where which is taking care of the Ukrainian children. The center, we understood that we want to help not only the children, but also the adults. So the center, we actually have now 2 centers. Both are run entirely by refugees themselves. So we've hired 4 full-time Ukrainian teachers. All of them are refugees. We are providing them with programs like English classes, Polish classes, dance classes, singing classes, therapy, different kinds of therapies. All of this is also being provided by the refugees themselves. We're paying them, we're signing contracts, we're doing everything. So they could earn money, but they could also maybe feel a bit better that they can do something not from the position of a refugee, but a person that comes with certain knowledge, with certain expertise. So we try to help both to the children, to their parents, who can use this time when the kids are there, and we're providing them with meals, with clothes, with medical care. The parents can use this time to arrange documents or papers, or just to have a break from being a parent for a few hours. So we keep continue to do this, and we will be doing this as long as it's needed.
Is there anybody has anything that they'd like to ask? Jacob, how long have you been director of the museum, and has the business of Holocaust commemoration changed in that time at all?
Well, I've been the director since 2010, the end of 2010, and well, the business of the Holocaust commemoration means couple of things. I mean, yes, in terms, in certain terms, this is entirely what it is. I mean, the business. So the heritage and the Holocaust has become a product that been sold. But we've seen that, especially at the early days of this post-transformatic Poland, so 1990s, early 21st century, there would be lots of those stories that would be told to the visitors that would be fake stories. I mean, they would not be grounded in real knowledge. But then in time, we've seen that today, especially today, this story, that the places that are being presented, available for the visitors, are genuine. I mean, there are Jewish community centers, there are Jewish communities, if you're Orthodox, you can attend Orthodox service. If you're Reform, you can go to Reform. There are Jewish museums, there are places that are genuinely Jewish. And that has changed. Certainly, this is something that kind of appeared over the last maybe those 5-10 years, and that's certainly something worth to remember. But of course, it's changing. I mean, how people are approaching the Holocaust is changing because the audience is changing. I mean, over the years, we would have lots of Holocaust survivors, people that survived and would come to Poland in this extremely painful journey. Now, obviously, we are seeing more of second generation, but also more and more third or fourth generation. So young people who knows that their roots are here, but their kind of feeling toward Poland is grounded in more in curiosity, but also very often they are also coming with the luggage of emotions that have been passed to them from a generation to generation. And this is something that we're seeing often, and of course is something that we're trying to work with.
Jacob, I just want to interject really quick to read a couple comments from the chat. We have a lot of people saying that this has been a really great tour, and that they would be interested in having a follow-up where they're able to view the last 2 parts of the museum that you kind of referred to, just given a little more time. A couple of people agreed with that. And then we had a question from Simone. What is Poland's Jewish community's relationship to Israel and Israeli Jews, or the Jewish community today?
Well, So thank you, and again, I'll be if Nancy is willing to, I would be delighted to do part 2 of this conversation. Yes, the relationship of the Polish Jews to the Israel is obviously positive. I mean, this is positive. Polish Jews are supportive of Israel. The Jewish community of Poland is of course small, and we don't really know how many Jews are living in Poland. Depending on the number would depend on the definition we use. Whether we use Orthodox definition or relaxed secular definition. But yes, Polish Jews are supportive of Israel, are having ties with Israel, are having family members in Israel. But yes, they feel, at least some of those Polish Jews that have roots in Poland, they feel to be precisely that, Polish Jews. I mean, they, especially after the 1990s, some members of the community in the early 1990s left to Israel. Those that stayed, this was their conscious decision to stay in Poland, to be a Polish Jew, and especially doing those kind of different activities like we're today, ceremonies like Yom HaShoah, during the March of the Living. Very often, people, Jews coming from outside, whether it's Israel, United States, Australia, are surprised to find such a small but nevertheless thriving, enthusiastic, positive, open Jewish community in Poland, and they ask the same question: why are you here in this graveyard? What it is that you hope to create here? And the answer is, this is where the home is. This is where we've always been. And I think they need to be supported. They need to be given the right to decide where they are, in the same way as American Jews are living in America and the Jews of Netherlands are living in Netherlands. There is this one diaspora of Poland. And of course, Poland is different. It's complicated. We know all about this. But of course, there is also politics. Whenever the politics step in, they create problems. So Polish-Jewish relations or relations between Poland and Israel been complicated, especially since we are having this right-wing government of which is kind of making problems. But on the ground level, things are going well.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you for being with us, and thank you to everybody for being flexible and adapting to this some of our tech challenges in this first event. I appreciate your willingness to stand with us here, and I so don't want to get cut off without saying thank you and goodbye. So thank you very, very much to everybody who participated. Thank you, Jack, and the board members for supporting me and tech to get this going. Thank you to Josiah for all your wonderful assistance, and to Jakub Nowakowski for taking us around, introducing us to the Galicia Jewish Museum, perhaps the first of several visits. Thank you, and we should all pray for peace. The commemoration of the Holocaust should lead us in the direction of peace. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nancy.